Another measure of looking at that, and especially in the case of protein, is a measure of the protein quality. And interestingly enough, that does not simply reflect then the characteristic of the soybean or the soybean meal, but also of the technological treatment, the crushing. And that is expressed, that can be expressed in the solubility of the protein in KOH. And as you can see, average daily gain in broilers, for instance, will increase as KOH solubility decreases to around 85 to level out and actually decrease a little bit. At the same time, feed conversion, of course, decreases. Basically, it improves. And of course, that has somewhere an ideal KOH solubility. And I point that out to you because there is an awful lot of variation in the field in this KOH solubility factor. And nevertheless, it is a key quality characteristic of soybean meal. And I like to demonstrate that to you by showing you a formulation example using differences in protein quality as expressed in KOH solubility to select the ingredients. You can measure that KOH solubility, and we can then evaluate in a single blend formulation one soybean meal against the other soybean meal. When you do that, as you can see here, I decrease my KOH solubility of the soybean meal, and here's in essence, depending on the inclusion level, 30%, 25%, or 20%, you see the money that a lower KOH than 80 or 85 in essence can cost you. And that is not constant. This is better shown in this graph where you can see here that up to 85% solubility, there is no effect on the value of the soybean meal. As soon as I drop my KOH solubility below 80, I get a decrease or a cost associated with this lower KOH solubility, and that depends on the level of inclusion. So here it's important to understand that inclusion level combines with KOH solubility, and that the response, the joint response need to be taken into consideration. And this can cost you then, of course, considerably. In the 75 to 85% range, where you find most soybean meal, each percentage unit difference in KOH solubility under this particular conditions, and I have to stress that, is worth about 45 US dollar cents. And on the basis of the KOH difference alone in US soybean meal, which has approximately 85%, an added value of $1.56 or €1.56, $2.26 relative to Argentinian soybean meal, because that is the two soybean meals that are used in this example. Now, you can also take that one step further and go beyond the KOH solubility. Here we can evaluate, for instance, two soybean meals, a soybean meal 1 and a soybean meal 2, that differ not only in average nutrient composition, but also then, of course, in KOH solubility, 85 versus 80. So here we have 5% difference, and associated with that, a difference in energy concentration. That energy concentration differences is roughly about then 4%. 4% difference there. When we talk about differences in crude protein, as we show here, 45 versus 43, that works through in differences in lysine and in the other amino acid, but particularly lysine, and that's what I've highlighted here, 2.8 against 2.7. There are, of course, price differences associated with this. In this particular case, I've taken $10 difference in price. You all know you trade lower protein soybean meal, you get less money for that soybean meal. That difference is in the range of about $10 in this particular case. And this is a real case situation in Europe. Here you see the comparison between the market price and the formulation value when you run single blend formulations with these two soybean meals. Again, for broiler formulation then, the market difference, of course, is 10 euros which is roughly equal to $14.2. But when I formulate then with it, taking into consideration the differences in amino acids, in KUH solubility, and therefore differences in digestibility, the value difference between these two soybean meals is really 13 euros or $17.5, roughly about $4.3 more. So this is in essence that the way you need to evaluate soybean meals one against the other. And I come back to that a little later in a more experimental setting. Here you see, and that is an important point that needs to be made, is as my soybean meal one, as soybean meal prices basically increase, the comparison of these two soybean meals show me that in essence the interest of the lower quality soybean meal relative to the higher quality soybean meal decreases. What does that mean? At high soybean prices, it is more interesting to formulate with high quality soybean meal. As soybean prices increase, the difference between these two soybean meals in value increases. And that's contrary to what most people expect or what the feed industry in essence does. As you increase feed raw material prices, they tend to look for cheaper ones and therefore quite often for lower quality ones. We have to recognize, of course, that quality ingredients and processes make quality feed. The emphasis of inspection should be on the ingredients and on the production processes, not necessarily on the finished feed. So that's one reason why in the feed industry, formulators, research can be so annoying for many buyers because they try to get the pressure of the feed and onto the ingredient. We have to realize that in essence the production of feed is basically or can be represented by this particular tube and the different stages in which you have the purchasing of the ingredient, the formulation, production, and the marketing and sale of the ingredient. Of course, at all stages you get quality control involved, which should be directed by research, based on research and sound scientific process. And that is normally what happens at this moment in the feed industry, and I'm fairly familiar with the Asian feed industry. That's also what happens here. Now we all realize, as I pointed out earlier, that really graphically represented here, the majority of my costs are associated, of course, with the ingredient. But each subsequent step in that production process adds cost to the process, adds cost to the product, until we get to the final sales price. Each one of these processes has, of course, an influence on quality. Now, you can buy cheap, as I show you. This is normally with buying with normal ingredients, or you can buy cheap with a lower cost ingredient. And then if you just simply apply the same production process, the same formulation, you obviously wind up with a cheaper product. But the quality is impossibly the same, or it is not possible to have the same quality. You can try to compensate for buying lower quality ingredients, and that is also done in the feed industry, by reformulating, changing your formulations, putting limits on ingredient inclusion, favoriting other ingredients, or by changing your production process, applying higher heat, more steam, etc. And then you get, of course, a partial recapping of that quality that you have lost. It is almost impossible, I can guarantee you that, to come up with the same final end product.